Okay, so we learned about callbacks, then we learned about promises. Now, I'm going to show you guys one function using callbacks, and then the same function reformatted to using promises. And you're going to see that promises are a lot cleaner and they're easier to read, and there's less definitions and less typing from us, right? Which is great. So let's define this. So we have const is good at math is true for now. And I'm going to define a function called handle math skills, right? So remember this first one, we're just using callbacks. So it's going to take in two callback functions. One, let's call this resolved function and rejected function. Okay. Now, since we have not defined these yet, we have to define it right here. Function, resolved function, and I'll just leave them blank for now. And this would be rejected. Okay, so back to our handle math skills. What are we going to do in the body of this function? Well, I'm going to check if this is true, if is good at math is true. If that's true, let's call our resolved function, right? Call our resolved function. Now, instead of just doing a string like this, I'm going to start passing in objects, because in real life, that's what you get anyways. You get back an error object, a success object, right? Or an array of objects. Rarely do you just get back strings. It's kind of weird. All right, so in this object, let's have a message, MSG. Let's have this, yay, you are so good at math. 2 plus 2 is equal to 4. Cool. Now, else, if they're not good at math, what are we going to do? We should call the rejected function. So let's call that. We're passing in an object. I'll call this reject message. And it will say, boo, you are so terrible at math. Okay. That's good enough. But what are we going to put in here in our definitions for the resolved and the rejected function? Well, let's go back here. If you see on this line, we're calling the resolved passing in an object. Same with reject. So these have to take in an object. I'll call this success obj, and rejected obj. Okay. So when this function is called with this object, what do you want it to do? Well, let's just console.log. Console.log success obj. Now, what is this success obj? Well, this success obj is this thing right here, the object. Okay, that's what we get access to. So we're going to console.log that. And for the reject, we're going to console.log rejected obj, which is this, right? Rejected obj dot reject message. Same here. We have to do dot message. Let's see how that works, okay? Before that, we actually need to call this handle math skills. We're going to pass in resolved function and then rejected function. Save. Yay, you are so good at math. Now, instead of console.logging the success message like this, let's add some more to it. Congrats. Okay, cool, right? So now remember, this is not a promise. It's just using basic if and else statements, and then it's calling other functions to do the job for it, right? Now, using callbacks, you see how we had to define two different functions plus the handle math function, right? Let's test this for the false first, see if everything is working correctly. Boo, you are so terrible at math. All right, so we did this with callbacks. Let's see how we can do this with promises. You might be thinking, changing this whole thing into promises looks very complicated. And why should I do that? Well, first of all, it's not complicated. It's actually very simple, and once I walk you through the steps, it will actually make a lot of sense. And as a bonus, it turns this whole thing asynchronous, because all promises are asynchronous. So it won't hold up your program, right? those are two good reasons to change it. Okay, so first I'm going to copy this function, put it down here, and then comment out all of this so our console.log doesn't get messed up. Okay, how do we change this to a promise? Well, since we're changing it to a promise, we don't really need these two arguments. So it'll be a function with no arguments. How do we make it return a new promise? Well, return new promise. New promise, we get access to resolve and reject, arrow function, curly bracket. Okay, now what? Well, you can actually just put everything inside, like so. Okay, if is good at math, call resolved function. But we took away the arguments. Why? Well, that's because we can use these guys instead. Resolved function, hey, just use the keyword resolve. So promises are coded so that resolve runs when it's actually resolved, and so on. Reject. Okay, cool. Now, what about our dot then and stuff like that? Well, let's scroll up first. For this, remember how we had to define two different functions? And then we had to call the handle math skills? Well, this you don't. You can just do handle math skills. Now, since this is a function, we have to call it. Since it's no argument, we're not passing in anything. Now this returns a promise, so it is async. So we have to do the dot then on it. Okay, dot then, what do we have access to inside dot then? We have access to whatever we passed into the resolve, which is an object, right? So we have access to this object. I'm gonna call this object, and you can call this whatever you want. I'm gonna call it success obj. Now, I'm gonna console.log success obj. That's this message, right? And then I'm gonna add on congrats. Okay, so right now it's false. Let's change this to true. Ooh, why is it saying object, object? Now, let's think about this. Then we're calling this success, but we forgot that success object is this whole thing, right? And we want the message. So we need to do success object.message. Yay, you are so good at math. What about for the failure? Well, that's when we use catch, remember? Success object, I'm gonna call this failure object. And then this is gonna be failure obj dot, not dot message, dot reject MSG. And then I'm just gonna add go learn more math. Okay, and then I'm gonna change this to false. Okay, so now you see that it included the reject message plus the go learn more math right here. But you see how the console error only displays the reject message. Okay. So all the console errors will display whatever is in your reject. Okay. But if you want it to display more or less or whatever you want, you can do a dot catch or dot then and then dot some more thens, and then you can do that. Okay. So let's take a look how these are different. Let me uncomment this as well. So this one, we had to define handle math skills, define a resolved function, define a rejected function, right? And then call it. And this would block your code, right? It has to run line by line because it's not asynchronous. This is just a regular function. This function, right? You don't have to define two new functions. You can use the built-in keywords resolve and reject. Actually, they're built-in methods, resolve and reject. Okay, and then it makes it asynchronous because you return a new promise. Using the word promise automatically makes it asynchronous. And then we call it by using the .then, so we don't have to worry about asynchronicity, okay? And then to handle errors, we do a .catch instead. As a developer, seeing .then, inside your head, you're like, oh, hey, that's when it's successful. If you see .catch, you know that it failed, right? Okay, I hope that was helpful. Let's move on and dive deeper into some methods of promises.